Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 253 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy. Glad to be with you. Oh my gosh, what a week this has been. As I'm recording today, we just got results out of Georgia and California for the February 2019 exams. I'm going to share a little bit of the very, very first edge of details that we've got there. I've just come back from, in my own personal life, it's just a whirlwind as well. Just came back from the graduation from college of our oldest grandson. And I just want to clarify, because sometimes people ask me, he's an adopted grandson, because I'm not old enough to have a grandson graduating from college. In any event, Patrick graduated from Butler University in Indiana. We are super proud of him. And it was very exciting to be at his graduation. But now we are leaving to go to New York City for his parents. Our son and daughter-in-law are both getting their master's degrees from Columbia University. So 3 graduations in about 8 days. It's a little crazy. And so we are just ripping around the country, getting to graduations. And how fun and cool is that? In any event, I know it's a busy time for everybody. I know there's a lot going on. We have a lot to share with you today. As I said, California and Georgia results. We'll give you those quick details in just a minute. But I thought that what I would do today would be to share with you a message that has been something of a classic in our course over the years. It's a message that I initially recorded many years ago and then updated recently. It's 5 things to do if you failed the bar exam. Now, I know that's not much of an uplifting topic to be talking about, but the reality is that as the numbers have come in around the country, as we're wrapping up the February 2019 bar exam season, there were by far more people that failed their bar exams than passed. And there were, frankly, far more repeaters than first-time takers. There's some stunning numbers about that coming out of California today. And the overall bar environment is bad. It's bleak. Most people are failing their exams. Now, I hope that you were one of the fortunate ones who passed, and we were very grateful for all of the students in our courses across the country who did pass their exams. And we've been bringing you interviews with some of those successful students. We'll continue to do that over the next few weeks. And we love sharing those stories because we know how inspirational they are. But this week, I thought we ought to just focus for a moment on what happens if you found out that you failed and how you kind of pick yourself up, what do you need to do, and how do you make that process work more effectively going forward so that you can pass your exam. So I'm going to share that message with you in just a minute. I also want to let you know that this episode of our podcast is brought to you, as always, by our webinar. It's called Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. We offer this free training on Thursday night at 7 p.m. local time, and it's absolutely free, as I said. All you need to do is register, and you can register on the show notes pages. Now, our show notes and our podcasts are available in both video and audio, so if you wanted to watch today's podcast, you could do that at celebrationbarreview.com/253. And of course, we're syndicated on Apple iTunes and iHeartRadio and Spotify. In any event, regardless of which format you're watching or listening, you'll find a button or a link to register for the webinar, or you can go directly to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, register for the webinar. We'll be looking at the 4 steps that successful bar takers follow in order to pass the exam. There are case studies, there's lots of information, and it's literally life-changing information, and I hope you'll join us for it. I think it could make a huge difference, whether you're a first-time taker or a repeater. But if you're taking your exam in July 2019 or anytime in 2020, this is the time to get started, and this is the way to begin by checking out this free training, how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Do something different. There you go. I got it out. All right. Well, let's turn now for just a moment to the statistics that we've got coming out of California and Georgia. And obviously, as I'm recording this, not obvious to you, but as I'm recording this, we have no other information. It's just the bare bones statistics. I'm going to start in Georgia, where the numbers are not good at all. In Georgia, there were 637 people taking the exam. Of those, there were 391 who were repeaters, and there were 246 who were first-time takers. So we had more repeat bar takers than first-time takers. The overall pass rate in Georgia is 44%. So again, we have another major jurisdiction in the country coming in at under 50% pass rate. Now, the number that you will hear most likely in the media is a 65% pass rate. That reflects the pass rate for first-time takers in Georgia. But again, that is a minority of people that were taking the exam. The repeat bar taker pass rate was 31%. The overall was 44%. And we'll have more details. We'll break that out in more detail. We'll do a special, I think, bonus episode of the podcast. Probably when I return from New York, we'll get a little more information for you. But the overall numbers, not very good. Again, more repeaters than first-time takers, and the numbers look pretty bad, 44% overall pass rate in Georgia. So if you were one of the people that passed in Georgia, congratulations, you're in a minority. If you failed, well, unfortunately, you're with the vast majority. But as bad as Georgia looked, California looked even worse. We got those results late on Friday the 17th, and here's the number. The overall pass rate was 31.4%. There's just no good way to say that. The examiners are very excited because that's up from last February's pass rate of 27%, so I guess that is good, but that is still a horrifically bad score and passing rate to be there. One of the things I thought was interesting is that there were 4,600 applicants in California this year, but only 25% of them were first-time takers. So 75%, a full 3/4 of the bar takers were repeat bar takers, and the pass rate for repeat applicants was only 28%. The pass rate for first-time applicants was a very low 41%. So if you compare that 41%, for example, to Georgia's first-time bar taker pass rate of 65%, you can see it's a huge difference. As we've been saying for a long time, a big part of the problem in California is that the pass rate number is ridiculously high. It's a 1440. If you translated that to the UBE schedule, it would be a 288. Takes a 266 to pass in New York. So you can see it is a huge, huge number that you have to hit in order to be successful. We can tell you that the mean MBE score in February 2019 in California was a 137. That's up from a 135.5 from last February. So the MBE scores are going up, but that is not anywhere near high enough. You need a 144. Again, you've got a circumstance in which the vast majority of bar takers were repeat bar takers, and the vast majority of people failed. We're looking at an overall pass rate that just is staggering, I think. And so a lot of discouragement, I think, coming out of California probably over the weekend and as this episode releases on Wednesday. We will have more detailed results for you. The examiners usually wait about 5 or 6 weeks for the detailed results, but we'll have a little bit more information for you, as I say, in a bonus episode of the podcast. If you're one of the people that took the California or Georgia exam and you did not pass, we understand the frustration and the disappointment that comes with that. I will tell you it is possible to pass those exams, even if you're a repeat bar taker. But again, as I've said so often, it requires that you do something different. If you're just doing the same thing, you are not going to move those numbers. And I think it's pretty clear the trend is not just a trend anymore. It is the new norm. The status quo is that more people fail than pass the exams. And so you've really got to give yourself enough time and enough energy and enough resources and enough tools to be successful. I think a part of this idea of having enough tools and resources is really the motivating idea behind today's primary message, talking about 5 things to do if you failed the exam. If you got failing results this weekend or last weekend or any time in this season, you know how difficult and hard it is. And so we wanted to offer some suggestions, some very concrete ideas about things that you could do. So let's not wait any longer. We'll jump into our message about 5 things to do if you failed your bar exam. Today we're going to be talking about 5 things that you should be doing if you find yourself in the position where you've failed the bar exam. Now, results are starting to come out over the next few weeks around the country, and I know that there are going to be a significant number of people who will fail their exams, and I want to make sure that you have some idea of what to do. If you've gotten your results as you're listening or watching this, there's certainly some steps that you can take right now, and I want to outline for you today 5 specific things that I think could make a difference for you if you did fail your bar exam. We're going to go through each one of those, and I hope you'll listen and take some notes and use this information to your own best benefit. First thing that I think is important to say about failing the bar exam is that when we talk about failing the exam, there is a distinction to be made between failing the test and actually being a failure. I recognize that many people equate those two things. They'll say to themselves, well, I failed the test, therefore I am a personal failure. And I want to be really clear about this. That is absolutely, unequivocally not so. I think in any other context we would recognize that, but because the bar exam is such a high-stakes test, it's easy to confuse those two things. And so you start feeling like you're a failure, and you really begin to feel that in your insides. It's important, if you feel that way, to talk to someone else about it, and you get it out of your system, because it's debilitating when it comes to your ability to be successful in the future. But it can also impact the quality of your life, the quality of your relationships, the quality of your work. And so I just want to overview with that if you failed the bar, what it means is that for a day or 2 days or 3 days, when you sat for a test, you simply did not perform in a way that some third party arbitrarily decided was insufficient or not good enough. It doesn't really mean anything about your personal success or your personal ability. And in point of fact, if you were good enough to get to the bar exam, that is, to get through law school, then you're good enough to pass the bar exam, and you're really a success by most measures in the world. It's just for those specific days you didn't reach the threshold or the bar. Now, with that thought in mind, and I know that's a lot to absorb and take in, but I want to give you 5 strategies for things you should be doing now that you've found out that you failed. And I want to talk about each one of those specific items. The first thing that we want to talk about here is the notion of what to do if you fail, and the first thing you have to do is to grieve it. Now, what I mean by grieving it is that you need to have the ability to just emotionally let go. You have to be able to say, this is really awful, it feels terrible, and you've got to give yourself the opportunity to grieve it and get through that process. For some people, that means really long cries. For other people, it's walks in the wood, maybe somewhere in upstate New York. For some people, it will be screaming and yelling. For other people, it's just getting away from everyone else. Ultimately, though, the goal here is that you understand and begin to recognize that you've just got to let it out. If you hold this feeling inside, you're going to have a real problem. It's going to build up, and ultimately it's going to explode. And the problem is much like this sneeze that I'm about to have one day. It just blows up, and you're like, oh my God, there's that sneeze, and then it's bad. So you want to make sure that you let go of this feeling. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen at an inopportune time and in an inopportune way. So the first thing that I want you to do is give yourself the opportunity, just as you would in any traumatic situation or any bad situation. You've got to be able to grieve what happened. And the truth is we all grieve differently, and there's no one right way to do this. And some people would say, oh, you're just overreacting. Why are you so upset? It's just a test. And yet other people, I think, clearly would recognize what a critical test this is and how much is at stake. And so there's really no one right way or single way that you go through that grief process, but you still have to go through it. Now, I'm worried when I encounter bar takers who failed, who say, well, I'm stoic, I'm not going to respond to this at all. And at that moment, I think they're being absolutely truthful and correct. But ultimately, at some stage, it will come back and there will be an impact. And one of the things that we want to avoid here is the equivalent of post-traumatic stress disorder, because those things tend to appear, those symptoms appear when stress comes back up later. And as you're studying and retaking and sitting for the bar exam, that's obviously the moment when that unresolved grief can jump up and grab you, causing enormous stress and anxiety. And so you want to give yourself a little bit of time. What that really means in practical terms is if you get your results on a Friday, give yourself the weekend to grieve. If you get your results on a Monday, give yourself till the middle of the week, 2, 3, 4 days to get through that process before you start making significant decisions about what you're going to do next. All right, so item number 2 is that you have to do first things first. You have to do the things that are necessary because you have to forgive yourself. And so the second step is to forgive yourself. And what I mean by forgiving yourself is really very simple. When you fail the bar, it feels like, as I said at the beginning, a personal failure, like you are a failure. But beyond that, many bar takers, in my experience, start to blame themselves. They start to feel as though they're insufficient in some significant way. For example, I'll hear things like, well, I didn't study hard enough, or I didn't study properly, or I used the wrong bar review, or I studied the wrong materials, or I didn't focus on this part of the exam, or I didn't spot the 8 issues that somebody told me were going to be on the test, whatever it might be. And as a result, we tend to carry those things like burdens, and we carry them with us all the time. The reality of that is that many people end up in a circumstance in which they literally can't figure out what to do next, and they're stuck. So this second step is critically important. You need to forgive yourself. You have to let go of whatever happened, whether it was right or wrong, or whether you think that worked or didn't work. You need to let go of it. You need to forgive the errors that you might have made. Maybe they were errors, but maybe not. It's okay either way. The danger of not forgiving yourself is that there's a tendency then to become defensive about what you did. To say, in effect, well, I'm not going to forgive myself, so I'm going to claim that everything I did was right and perfect, and therefore my result, my failure, was everyone else's fault. We call that the blame game. It's very dangerous to do that. And I want to encourage you that if you get a failing result, be kind to yourself. Be gentle with yourself as you go through. Remember, step number 1 was the grieving process. But you also have to recognize that the tendency in step 2 will be to blame yourself along with a lot of other people or entities. You'll blame the bar examiners, you'll blame your law school, you'll blame the American Bar Association, you'll blame your bar review, you'll blame me, whatever it might be. But the reality is that all of that is really just covering for blaming yourself at a deeper level. And so if you don't forgive yourself, it's impossible to move forward. And when I see people who are really stuck in that ongoing rut where they keep doing the same things over and over again, one of the reasons for that is that they haven't forgiven themselves. They're literally wallowing in the same sense of despair and self-loathing and unhappiness with what they did. Did you do everything right? Well, probably not, but it doesn't mean you did everything wrong either. And I think it's really important that you give yourself a little bit of chance of time to go through that process. Get over it. You know, I suppose lapsed Catholics really appreciate this, but the idea of going to confession, to confess your sins, you get over it, you forgive yourself, you accept the forgiveness, and you move on. That's analogous to what we're talking about here. So item number 2 is to forgive yourself. Item number 1, go ahead and grieve the process. Number 3 in our list, so I suppose is probably for those of you that are a bit more rational and stoic. And number 3 of steps that we want to do is to do a non-emotional evaluation of what really happened. Now, what do I mean by this? This non-emotional evaluation simply is an opportunity or an exercise in which you sit down with a piece of paper and a pen or your digital device, whatever it might be, and you make a list of things that went well for you as you studied and took the bar, and the things that did not go well. Now, if you've been in any of my webinars or watched my materials, you know that I believe and teach what's called the success-based approach to learning, which we find is much more useful than the failure or problem-based approach to learning. What I would recommend here is that you use the success-based approach. You see, no matter what score you received, we would ask the question, why was that bar exam score so high? Now, I know you're saying, wait a minute, Jackson, you've got the wrong video here. I failed. So shouldn't we be asking why it was so low? No, not really. We should ask why it's so high. Why did you get a 134 and not a 130 or a 120 or a 110 or whatever the numbers might be in your situation? We want to find out what you did well and what is it about your performance that gave you that score and not a lower score. Once you've figured that out, you can begin to evaluate where your strengths are and where you need to continue working. But it's been my experience that when a student ignores their strengths and they focus entirely on the things that didn't work, that they're putting themselves in a deep hole. And one of the ways to get out of that deep hole is to do this non-emotional evaluation. What was good about your studies? And you might say, well, you know, I put in this many hours, I studied consistently. I learned a lot about these subjects. I realized that there were some areas where I didn't know much about the law going in, and so on. And you begin to build on those things that you did. Then you can ask what wasn't so good about your studies. And you might say, well, you know, I borrowed somebody else's bar review books, or I didn't study until about 4 weeks before the exam, or I was distracted, or I was afraid, and so I tried to memorize at the last minute and recite elements of the law. You know, being able to non-emotionally evaluate those things is really helpful. What's the best way to do that? Well, it's writing it down. Make a list, look at it, but don't judge it. Just look at it. Simply accept that there are some things you did that were good, some things that probably weren't so good. And if you can get the non-emotional evaluation in your mind, you're going to find it's a whole lot easier to begin to assess what was actually positive for you and what now needs to be corrected. You see, what I find so often is that people only do one side of the evaluation. They only look at what went wrong. That's the problem-based approach to learning. And frankly, I come across a lot of people who come to our course who have taken what I call one of the big box bar reviews, and they failed, and they say, well, here's everything that was wrong. And there's a part of me, and I'm not going to lie, there's a part of me that feels pretty smug about that when I hear that, and I want to say, well, I could have told you all that. But I also know that there were some things, even in the big box bar review, that went right. And the difficulty is that if this particular student is not considering what went right, they're putting themselves in a trap. And I hate to see that happen to anyone. So I want to encourage you to avoid that trap whenever possible. Just make the list and then evaluate it. Now, this list may take you a day or 2 or 3, maybe as you go through that grieving process. And so it's helpful to keep the list with you for a few days and pull it out when you're feeling a little bit less emotional about the results, perhaps when you can talk about them, review them, and not find yourself getting choked up. But then at whatever point that happens for you, look at the list. What was good? What wasn't good? Resolve to work on the things that are strengths to make them better strengths, and then not to focus exclusively on the weaknesses. You want to improve the weaknesses, no doubt about that, but you don't want to focus exclusively on them, and that's why I want you to do this non-emotional list. It's really an easy step. I think in the aftermath of the bar exam, it's easy to feel like everything was wrong, everything was bad. Therefore, I'm no good, I can't do it, I'm bad. We're back up to the very start about you being a failure, and that's the worst thing you can be doing. So that's our third step. It's a non-emotional evaluation. All right. The fourth thing you should be doing if you get into the situation where you find yourself having failed the bar, and it's very simple, but I know it's going to be a tough one for some of you, and here it is. You need to get restarted now. Restart now. Some of you are going to say, well, wait a minute, you told me I needed time to recover. And I mean, yeah, you needed a day or 2, but you don't need a month, you don't need 6 weeks, you don't need 6 months. And I understand that as much as I've talked about grieving and forgiving yourself and doing this non-emotional evaluation, you're going to need a few days to do that. But literally, that's a few days, not a few weeks or a few months. Now, in the beginning of the results cycle, it's easy to have the sense, it's a false sense of luxury that you can take some time before you get restarted. That is a huge mistake. You should begin right away. It's an advantage to you if you're sitting for the bar in a jurisdiction like Florida or some of the early UBE states that get their results out early. Unfortunately, if you're in a jurisdiction like California or Georgia that gets their results out very late, you don't get that luxury at all. But either way, no matter when your results came out, you need to get restarted now. Some people will be saying, when I say that, to themselves, they'll be saying, I really feel like I need to sit out an exam and I need to understand the reasoning behind the test and I need to learn everything. I'm going to wait an exam and come back. Now, sometimes that's a legitimate reason. Someone may say, I'm an accountant. I can't take time away during the particular tax season to take the bar. Or another person would say, I've got significant family requirements, or there's a wedding going on, or a baby coming, or something else that's certainly going to make it difficult, if not impossible, to sit for the next exam. But outside those sorts of unusual externalities, I would say that my advice is to sit for the next bar exam. Absolutely take the next exam. So for the next bar exam, you've got the momentum of the studies that you've just done. You have the momentum of the work and what you've learned. I found that the materials, relatively speaking, are going to be fresh in your mind, no matter where you studied or who you studied with. And so it's to your advantage to take the next bar exam. Sometimes people ask, well, is it better to take a July test or a February test because of pass rates? The reality is it makes no difference at all. The test is exactly the same. The pass rates only vary because of who's taking the test. So it's rarely to your advantage to sit out and wait. And really what you're doing, if you think about it, is you're putting the entire bar study process on hold and still like that basket of bad stuff over your head. It's sitting out there over you for a full year from where you are right now. And I think that's a really difficult process for that period of time to wait to take the exam a year from now and then wait for results after that. And so here we are a year from today just finding out if you can move on with this significant part of your life. I honestly believe that if you start right after you get your results, you'll have enough time to prepare for the exam, particularly if you're using our course. Practically speaking, you need about 250 to 300 hours. If you're a retaker, it's really on the low end. It's closer to the 250 hours. So most people will have enough time even if they're getting their results late in the season. In my experience, this is absolutely manageable. And even with those late test result dates, you can still stay at about 20 hours a week of study. So for those of you that have been told or believe that you have to study 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 hours to prepare for the exam, empirically that's not true. It's absolutely not necessary, and you don't need to buy into that approach. There's no real reason behind it. What's happening there is that what most people are doing is asking you to memorize. And as I've written and talked about and videoed about, memorization is the least effective way to study. It's the most time-consuming, and the examiners don't reward that behavior. So if you get away from memorization, and if you use an approach to learning like our spaced and stepped repetition package, this is simply learning in small pieces, and then repeating that and learning the way we're naturally wired to learn. As children, we learn by repetition, not by memorization. So you'll have the advantage of learning that way, and you're going to get a much better result. It's hard to get back in and start all over again, particularly if you think, oh my gosh, I've got 4 or 5 or 600 hours of study ahead of me. And the truth is, you really don't need to do that. But the other truth about all this is that the longer you wait, if you choose to sit out, the harder it is to go back. You know, there's a reason that some of these great aphorisms exist. You know, the one about you got to get back on the horse right away. Well, yeah, the reason for that is that fear builds, and the longer you wait, the more the fear grows. And I can tell you that virtually every week I talk to someone who's taken a bar exam and then waited. They sat out thinking they would sit out 1 exam or maybe 2, but it turned into years, 3, 4, 5, 10, or in many cases 20 years. And now they're coming back to me because it's an unfulfilled item in their life. You know, I don't really know anyone that wants to be in that position if they can avoid it. So my 4th step then is to get started now. It's a critical step, I think, for moving ahead. All right. Well, now we're ready to talk about the 5th step, which is don't repeat the same errors. Oh, this is a big one, a real big one. I spoke to somebody recently who was in one of my webinars, and she heard me say, I was actually quoting the financial guru, Dave Ramsey, and he was talking about the stinky diaper conundrum. You know, the one that says, well, it's warm and smelly, but it's mine, and I'm just going to sit here. You know, I think the same thing is true of the bar exam sometimes. We tend to become very protective of the warm, stinky mess that we make when we're studying. Now, this is not a contradiction to my point number 2 about forgiving yourself. In fact, it really goes hand in hand with it. Because if you forgive yourself, what you're doing is giving yourself permission to change what you're doing, to change the approach that you're taking. If you were studying with a big box bar review, maybe you should look at a smaller, more personalized course like ours. If you were studying with us and you fail, maybe you should look at some of the different resources that we offer. Things like PhotoReading or personal mentoring or the Paraliminal package or the audio meditations, any of those things that might enhance or help target your studies. Those might be more valuable and it might be more helpful to get more conference time, more personal assistance. Those would all be useful things for you to do. In other words, don't just keep repeating the same process over and over again without changes. And that's the great danger. You're not learning and growing. You know, every time you take the exam, you have the opportunity to learn and grow, even if you fail. If you're trying new things, you'll have a decidedly better chance of being successful than if you simply keep repeating the same process over and over again. So when someone comes to me and says, well, you know, Jackson, I failed the bar exam, and I had failed, let's say, the Cal Bar, 3 times. It's not with us. They were taking another course. And for the rest of the conversation, this person who had failed proceeded to tell me all the things that they knew about the bar exam. They were really very thoughtful. They had really obviously put a lot of effort and information into this, but everything they told me was empirically, statistically, and factually wrong. It wasn't alternative facts. It was lack of facts. And no matter how hard I tried to explain to the student that their understanding of the scoring and their understanding of how to study and their understanding of the test and that there were other approaches and that the things they were saying were not correct statements empirically, just I think convinced them even more that they were correct. And you know, In this day and age, this whole idea of alternative facts is really bizarre to me, but I see it even in the bar exam. There are people that just believe things that aren't true, and they were convinced that all they had to do was keep studying the same way, and incrementally they would get better. And finally, I said to this particular person, I think if you're going to just keep doing what you've done the last 3 times, you really don't need our course. But more than that, unfortunately, more likely than not, you're going to fail again, and the statistics say that. And you'll keep failing until you do something different. You know, I don't care who you study with, but you've got to do something different, even within the context of what you're doing. And if you simply keep repeating the same process and just trying to study a little more or memorize a little more or issue spot a little more, really what happens is you're going to get about the same result. You see, the bar exam is designed to take the same inputs and return the same output every single time. And the bar examiners are very proud of their ability to do that. And I think for a lot of people, that's really a major intellectual challenge, an emotional challenge as well, because they get stuck on repeat and they just keep churning and churning and churning, doing the same thing over and over again, and the results never change. So one of the things I think you absolutely have to do if you fail the bar, after you've done that non-emotional evaluation in step number 3, is start asking yourself, what can I do differently now? I forgive myself for the mistakes I might have made, but what can I do differently this time? Could I look at taking a different bar review? Or if I want to stay with the same bar review, could I change the level of service? Or could I add features or benefits or programs that might assist me, that might get me through some of the things that are problematic? Can I build on my strengths and do more of those? Do I need to make changes in what I'm doing? Do I need to request accommodations from the bar examiners for some particular reason? Maybe I should look at switching jurisdictions and find a better jurisdiction for me and my skills, or maybe one that's got a lower cut score. Whatever those things are, you should be looking at them. But for goodness sake, don't keep repeating the same process over and over again. Well, those are the things that I think that you need to do after you've gotten a failing result. It's not an easy list. You need to grieve, you need to forgive yourself, you need to do that non-emotional evaluation, you need to get started now, and finally you've got to commit to not making the same errors as you work through your studies now that you did in the past. In my experience, that's the best way to assure that you'll get a different result on the next bar exam when you don't do those things. And I think that if you don't, you're putting yourself at the risk of getting the result that you don't want over and over again. We talk about making the next bar exam your last bar exam. That's not just a slogan or a phrase. It happens by doing these 5 things first. I know it's hard to talk about failing the exam. It's hard to think about it before the results come out, if you're watching this before your results have come out. But I'll tell you, it's really tough after the results come out if you're someone who's failed the test. But if you take to heart what I've said today, I can tell you that it's made a huge difference, and I've worked with people in every exam who've done exactly these 5 things, and they've turned their failing results into passing results. And that's what I want for you. I hope that you'll consider these items, take them to heart, put them to work and to action, and that we'll see your name on the past results in the very near future. Thanks. Well, that's our episode for today. I hope that those 5 suggestions are helpful to those of you who are retaking your exam. And I want to remind all of you, again, whether you're taking the exam as a repeater or as a first-time taker, to join us on Thursday night at 7 p.m. local time for our free training, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. You can register by going to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Or you can just click on the button here on the show notes page and sign up, and we'll see you on Thursday. Again, everybody, I want to congratulate those who have passed their exams in February 2019. We're pretty well wrapped up with that season now. Moving ahead to the July 2019 exams. We'll have more information about bar results over the next couple of weeks on the podcast as we get some more detail. We'll also be sharing some interviews with successful bar takers from around the country because we know how inspiring and encouraging those are. And we'll have lots more information for you as you begin to move toward your exams at the end of 2019 and into 2020. So for everybody here at Celebration Bar Review, we hope you have a great week. Thanks for joining us along the extra mile, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.